Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the LGBTQI plus Inclusion in Sport webinar panel. This event is part of Pride in Sport 2020 campaign and is created by our DCU Centre for Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. We're very proud to support this initiative. And this is a conversation starter that the Pride in Sport campaign touches on two things that DCU is passionate about. We're passionate about sport, and we're passionate and committed to inclusion. This campaign is designed to start discussions about the need for LGBTQI plus inclusion in sport. And the conversation aims to promote policies protecting this community as they participate and enjoy sporting activities. Pride in Sport aligns with our values at DCU. We are a diverse and inclusive university. We embrace, we enjoy difference, and we're open to dialogue. This campaign has released an excellent set of short videos which really bring home to us the message at its heart. The videos are emotional, they're encouraging, they're empathetic, and they're inspiring all at the same time. But they're also provocative, and I urge you to watch them and to watch them with empathy and intelligence. You get not just expert insights, but personal stories about the positivity that comes from being proactively inclusive in sport, to be inclusive with intention and to be inclusive in a welcoming way. I'd like to thank all who are involved in this important advocacy campaign. It's led by our DCU Centre for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion, and it's produced in collaboration with Leman Solicitors, and it's sponsored by our colleagues in Allied Irish Banks. We really appreciate your support for this initiative. I'm confident that this campaign will make a difference in making all sports more inclusive and especially more enjoyable for all.
Thank you. And that was a message from our President, Professor Daire Keogh, and I'd like to thank Daire for his support and all his support over the years for the Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this very important webinar. It's been a long time coming, and we're delighted that you've taken the time to join us today. Firstly, I would like to just briefly introduce myself and the work we do in the Centre of Excellence and how this campaign came about. And then what I'm going to do is we'll move into a panel discussion. So we established the DCU Centre of Excellence in 2018, and specifically to work on campaigns such as this. We describe the centre as research and action. So we work with industry partners and specialist organisations to raise awareness and promote all aspects of diversity and inclusion, whether that happens to be in the workplace or in this particular case, the focus is on sport. And it was late last year, we were doing some work with Geraldine McTavish from the GAA, who you will hear from today. And we were having discussions with them around supporting them on their progress around diversity and inclusion within their own organisation. And at the same time, we were having conversations with Mick Bowen and some of the challenges he was experiencing as a sporting manager. And we also had discussions with Larry Fenelon, who is one of the partners in Leman Solicitors. And we have Morgan Crowe actually representing Leman Solicitors today. But essentially, we were having multiple conversations across the board around what are the challenges that sports clubs and sporting organisations are facing around being more inclusive, and in particular being inclusive around the LGBTQI plus community. So we recognise that sporting organisations need to tackle the issues surrounding a lack of inclusion in sport. And we also we're having conversations around, the profound impact this can have on individuals. I was actually having a conversation with somebody this morning that said that they spent 15 years, which from their perspective, they said is a long time in university sports at the top level. And they said they never came across anybody who was gay. And that's just incredible, because obviously they did. They just didn't come across anybody who felt like that they could disclose and be themselves within the team. And really, they're the type of things that we want to discuss and focus on today. So the purpose of the event today really is to focus on kind of three key things. One is to have the discussion around how can sporting organisations be more inclusive in their policies and practices. The second thing is how can we ensure that all aspects of sport, whether it be organisations at the top or the sports clubs in the community, how can they be more welcoming and create welcoming environments for freedom of expression of gender and sexual expression. Discussing how we as in collectively the people who are here today can help organisations develop best practice and promote policies that support more inclusive community sports clubs and environments. And we would encourage you to get involved. You can submit your questions. We have, if you would prefer to submit a question privately, you can submit to Emma Lou, so she works with us in the Centre of Excellence, or you can just submit your question. We want this to be an open and this is a safe space today, so put forward your questions. If there's anything in particular you'd like us to put to the panel, please feel free to put that forward. Lastly, just before we move in to the panel, I'd like to just check if we have Caoimhe from AIB, Caoimhe Scolard from AIB on the call. If we don't, it's no problem, because really what I wanted to do is just thank AIB for their support throughout this campaign. In the centre, from our perspective, is non-profit, so we need organisations to kind of support the great work we do. And thank you, I have to say, to AIB, who I know are very active in this space, but we were delighted to have them come on board and support us and sponsor us in this space.
Hello, Caoimhe here, Caoimhe Scolard, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of AIB, who is very proud to be sponsoring this Pride in Sport campaign. My own role within AIB is in the area of diversity and inclusion, also known as D&I. This is something I really relish, as it aligns very much to some personal values that I hold, those of empathy, open-mindedness and compassion. I've been a long-standing HR professional, but I've also studied law previously, and what D&I translates into for me is no more than the honouring of someone's fundamental human rights. Bear in mind, we are all born equal, we have freedom of expression and thought, and we have a right not to be discriminated against. I work with AIB's business leaders, people leaders and employees at large to drive an ever-progressive D&I proposition for the bank, not just for our staff, but also for the communities and the customers that AIB serves. We've got that top-down sponsorship, but we also lean into our colleagues and ask them, what would you like more of, or less of, or how can we better support you? There's many achievements that we've made in recent years, but there's still lots more to do. Some of the initiatives we've ran with, which I think might very well add value in a sporting context, include the likes of developing and rolling out an ally pack so that those in a majority group know that they can show how they stand in solidarity with the LGBTQI community. There's do's and don'ts around behaviour, as well as guidance on language and other supporting resources. We equally have rolled out other trainings, such as the ABCs of LGBTQI, to equip people to have the right conversation. A critical component of our focus is that around storytelling. We see that there's a role to play in really having role models and in driving an awareness and appreciation of what it must be like to stand in somebody else's shoes, especially someone in a minority group. When the idea of a Pride in Sport campaign was first positioned, it was quite frankly something I jumped at the idea of. AIB sees that we have a role to play in driving a better and more progressive society within Ireland. Sport is also very important to us, with a long-running relationship with the GAA, for example, and we know firsthand through our own sporting clubs just how difficult it can be to create a level playing field in sport. In sport, you're classified by gender, and I think that exacerbates the problems ever more. But what I'm really encouraged by is the will of many gathered in this Pride in Sport campaign to really affect change. I believe that together we can surmount the challenges faced. We can make progress at pace, and together ensure that sport, be it for spectators or players, is an ever-inclusive environment.
I'm sure you don't want to listen to me anymore. So what I'm going to do is move straight into the panel. I'm going to go around as I see people on the screen. And very briefly, if you don't mind, what I'm going to do is just ask you very quickly, just give you an introduction to yourself. And maybe, I suppose, your interest and expertise in this area. And Tanya, I see you're right in front of me, so I'll start with you. Thank you.
Oh gosh, the short straw. Hello, everyone. I'm really honoured to be here, and thank you so much, Sandra, and everyone at the Centre for inviting me to come along. My name is Tanya Mhuirthile. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Law and Government here in DCU, and I'm interested in questions of identity and the human body and legal regulation of that. So my big interests are in trans rights and in intersex rights.
Thank you, Tanya. And Gordon, you're next up.
Thanks very much, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Gordon Grehan. I'm Operations Manager with TENI, that's the Transgender Equality Network Ireland. We're Ireland's national transgender organisation. I am here because I've done a lot of work kind of around policy development and practice and education for different organisations, for employers, for third level institutions. And we're kind of now looking at the sport area in terms of what we can do around policy and procedure and best practice in that kind of area.
Great, thank you, Gordon. And Morgan?
Thanks, Sandra. Morgan Crowe is my name. I'm an associate solicitor in Leman Solicitors, filling in for Larry Fenlon's big shoes today. So we specialise in sports law. We represent approximately half of the 70-odd governing bodies throughout Ireland. So right from the larger ones like the FAI and cycling down to your tug of wars and play target shooting, which would be a little bit smaller. And really over the last few years, we're seeing that inclusivity issues be that through the 2020 campaign, female sport, or LGBTQI policies, or else trans policies. We're getting more and more questions about how do we write policies, how do we make our sport more inclusive, how do we connect with our grassroots members. So I'd be interested to hear a lot more about that today. Thanks.
Thank you, Morgan. And Gerald, we lost you for a minute, but you're back now just in time. If you wouldn't mind, just give us a brief introduction to yourself, please. You're on mute there, I think. No. We can't hear you. We might... I might let them in the background work with you to get your mic working, if you don't mind, and we'll just move on. Is that okay? Great. Okay, so Tanya, I think I have a question for you, just to kind of get us started. Sorry, I have some feedback going on there. I'm not sure if somebody has a mic and a phone on. You might check that. So Tanya, just a quick question. Can you give us a quick overview of what the plus in the LGBTQI plus means? And I say quick because I know that could be a very long question.
Yeah, there's lots of things hidden behind the plus there. Many different letters, but I suppose the quickest way to explain it is that actually it's a bit of a stew, so it's a whole load of different things all lumped in together, things that really aren't connected for any other reason except that they, I suppose, challenge our way of understanding if we only view the world with the very particular lens of heterosexuality. So in LGBTI, so it's LGB, about 5 T's, 2 Q's, I, 4 A's, NB, 2 S, small s /D, R. So that's kind of the most recent version of the entire acronym that I have seen plonked down somewhere. And what you've got there are things, questions about sexual orientation. So who are we attracted to? Questions about romantic orientation. So we may not have much of a sexual drive, but we might be very interested in having intimate, deep personal relations with people. Questions about embodiment. So way of beings, biology, how is your body constructed? Questions about gender identity. So who you believe yourself to be deep within the marrow of your own bones. And then questions about gender expression. So how you choose to express who you are which really the more important side of that is how other people read that, and you may then find yourself at the wrong end of discrimination if someone is upset by the way that you appear.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm always impressed with you, I have to say. I know you do a lot of work with us within the university, you know, just promoting our own gender identity policy and practice. And I have to say, it's very impressive how you remember all the letters, the alphabet soup, I know I've heard you describe it as. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So Morgan, my first question is to you, and it's really just around some of the comments you made in your video. And just to note, we do have videos up on the Centre of Excellence website. Sorry, there's feedback there again. I think it might be coming from yours, Morgan. So I would encourage people, you know, if you haven't had the opportunity to go and watch the videos of, please do. But Morgan, in your video, you mentioned how tricky it can be for sporting organisations to implement inclusive policies, and how, you know, I completely understand that, because it's the same in any kind of environment. But from your perspective, what do you think managers could be doing to kind of get things started?
Yeah, I hope there's no feedback there. Yeah.
No, that's better now. Thanks. Cool. That's fine.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, the first thing for managers is to think it's not just giving this lip service. It's not kind of red tape and a box ticking exercise. It's about connecting with your members and resonating with your community through inclusivity policy. So it's a great opportunity to connect with more people and get more people involved in your sport. On the in terms of what policies they can do, I mean, they can look at your mission statement. You can make sure it's inclusive. You can look at codes of conduct to make sure they have homophobic, transphobic, and biphobic clauses in there. And then on the actual trans inclusive policy itself, I completely empathise that that's a very tricky issue. I saw today with great delight that the US elected their first ever trans senator, and I'm convinced it's only a matter of time before this is the first ever trans athlete Olympic gold medalist or trans athlete running out in Crowe Park in an All-Ireland final. And really what the message to managers is about trying to identify the benefits of trying to be proactive in drafting policies, or at least sitting down and getting the discussion going about the policies. In terms of the trans policies, again, kind of balancing inclusivity with safe sport and fair sport. So this is something that World Rugby did very recently. They conducted, I think it took them about 2 years to conduct a review, and they concluded that rugby union for trans females is not a safe sport. That guidance is going to be reviewed on an annual basis. Interestingly enough, the Rugby Football Union in the UK has declared that they're not going to follow those guidelines. They think they're too restrictive and not backed by evidence. So that, I suppose, underlines how tricky an issue it is, but that doesn't mean that the managers who are listening today can't start having those conversations and really looking at trying to get more participation in their sport. So typically you might see a trans policy that might have age brackets, so maybe 0 to 14, anybody can participate in their gender that they identify with. And then maybe from 14 to 18, you might have a more an avenue where people can approach somebody within the sport with a view to, when I turn 18, I want to be able to, lawfully compete. What do I need to do now, etc. So just make it more inclusive and trying to start that conversation and get policies with a view to growing the sport.
Yeah, and I think, I suppose, the starting point really, and again, this is part of why we have started and kept this campaign going, it really is around people engaging with it, like it's a whole new language, as Tanya has taken us through some of it there, and it can be very difficult for us to kind of get our heads around it, particularly if we're not familiar with it and not in this space as we are. So I think it's, and really, I suppose that's part of the reason why we've brought the group together and are focusing on this, is to help people engage with it, is move beyond the, not sure about what the right thing to do is, and to kind of tap into the network of people who know how to help you navigate through this. Gordon, just kind of keeping focus on the video. So within yours, you mentioned about the need for people to understand steps of a policy. And how important it is for all individuals and allies to advocate for promotion of inclusion, not just the community. So do you mind talking to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the question you were asking Morgan there about, like, what can leaders do in terms of role modeling, good practice as well. I think, to me, everything comes down to education and policy. So if you've got those two things working together, you're going to be off to a good start. But a policy in and of itself isn't going to work unless it's a living document, unless people understand that it exists and they're able to understand what's in there. So I think sometimes when we talk about policy, it sounds kind of, it's like a dusty kind of pile of pages sitting on a shelf somewhere. But really what we need to be doing is kind of giving the people on the ground who are dealing with people day to day some kind of tools to be able to do what they do and to make sure that people are included in sport. So I would always encourage that if we're doing a policy, it's great. It's really important to have an overarching statement of this is what we believe, this is the DNA of our organization. But alongside that, we need to be giving the people on the ground something that they can work with that's real and practical, so that they can actually include people, because the wonderful thing, I mean, I have to be upfront and say I'm not a sports fan. I don't play sports. I know nothing about sports. I don't know why I'm here. But the wonderful thing about sport is that, like, people are so passionate about sport and so passionate about people being included in sport that, there's already this amazing kind of baseline there. There's a great foundation to build on in terms of inclusion. And I find that so encouraging. And I think, people want to be inclusive. They want to make sure people can play sport. And it's just about giving them the tools they need to be able to do that. And I think everyone kind of can get on board with that, because everyone sees the benefit of being able to connect with their community, the mental health benefits, the physical health benefits that sport brings. So that would be my feeling on it.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think I'm the same with you, Gordon. I'm ashamed to say it's not something I'm involved in either, but at the same time, I do a lot of work, particularly with organisations around people being connected. And feeling like they belong. And I was actually reading a study there recently that showed that within our brains, when we are socially excluded, it actually lights up the brain as if we have been physically hurt. So this concept of being excluded and not being allowed, but not being able to be ourselves or not feeling like we belong, actually has really negative impacts on us as humans and from a psychological and mental health perspective, And I certainly think that for us, and certainly for me personally, this is why this is a really important topic. Geraldine, if you don't mind, I could move to you and just, I suppose, take in Morgan's and Gordon's comments. And I suppose this is the kind of thing you've been leading on and implementing from a GAA perspective. Would you mind just talking to us from your perspective about what's the practical aspects of that as you implement these type of policies and practices within a sporting organisation?
Thanks.
Hopefully we haven't lost you there. I see your video's gone.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. If you're, yeah, we can. Go ahead. Yep.
Perfect. Sorry. Yeah, just I would be passing my Gordon, Morgan, and Tanya there, and yourself, Sandra, closely with yourself and with Gordon. I suppose there's been 10 years of work in the area of inclusion and integration in the GA. There was a Tony Watini was there. A gender diversity work committee for a number of years, and there's been policies that we're doing in inclusion. What I've in group is that there is a mixture of opinions, a mixture of expertise, I'm secretary of it, so I'm trying to keep the time. What technical, they have a structure that goes to it. I'm straight down to work. So, yes, we might have a 4-page thing that we wish, it's our wish list. Then, like Gordon said, Keogh are able to actually look and actually it's on that simple image that GA has expressed through a lot of the campaigns to club level, is that of respect and also of the identity of where we all belong. I've been a GA player for as long as I can remember. I've been on a football pitch for as long as I can remember in Carnan. And to move to Dublin and still have that network and that connection of people around me. And I think that comes across in what we're trying to implement. And I suppose I'm building on the blocks that have been there previous to me, and the volunteers members who are involved and continue to be involved. And what I say about a lot of the areas we're focusing on now in diversity and inclusion is we've always had LGBT members in the GA. This is the it might not have come out, but we've always had them there. So it's about retaining them or asking them to come back and to help us progress societal changes and also be part of the team again. And I suppose that's the message that I would like to put out there from the GA's perspective.
Thank you, Ger. And I think that that's a really important point, is around visible role models, you know, because it's going to be, you know, we can't be expecting young people, you know, who maybe have spent their whole lives in sport from when they were very young, you know, to all of a sudden be able to kind of what can be very personal things about themselves. So it's a really important point of, you know, people who are maybe a little bit further down the line and, you know, to be able to kind of come back and be visible role models and share their personal stories to help kind of drive the change within sport. Tanya, I have a question for you, just I suppose on that point around, you know, freedom of expression. And I suppose from your perspective, you know, why do you think that this is an important part of people's lives, and why is it important for sports organisations to kind of take this on board? The big question.
The big question.
You're well able.
Easy falls this way. Wow. And that was my attempt at being sporty. Right. What it's part. People feel very passionately about sport, and people feel also very passionately about who they are. And we are more than just our physical beings or who we are inside our heads. We are also the sum of our interests and our hobbies, and you know, all of that becomes part of how we express ourselves and how we move through the world. That doesn't sound too kind of warm and fluffy, although there's nothing wrong with people who are into warm and fluffy stuff, but sport it's one of those things that catches people at a visceral level. You know, it gets you right where your heart beats. And I mean, you mightn't be enormously interested in sport, but if you happen to sit on a sofa alongside someone who's mad for it and you're watching a big game, you can't help but get caught up in the drama of the whole thing. And you mightn't be all that very interested. And yet, when Cork hit Croke Park, you find a hidden part of yourself that emerges and becomes tribally hugely invested in Cork doing really well. And so those two things, sport and who we are so inherently entwined and interconnected that it can feel sometimes, if you're passionate about sport and you're passionately involved, that you've lost a part of yourself if you can't do it anymore. Like in my work, I speak to a lot of intersex people about their lives, and I've had someone speak to me break down in tears because since her intersexness has been discovered over 25 years, she hasn't felt like she can swim in a pool anymore. And that's where she used to find her relaxation. It's where she used to find her bliss. And she can't it feels like a whole part of herself has been ignored ever since. And that's why it's really important. It's really important because of, as you said, that sense of community and connection we have with other people, but also the chance that sport gives you to go outside yourself and your day-to-day problems and to zone out into something completely different that gives your mind a chance to rest, it gives your body a chance to exercise, and it gives you a chance to hit the reset button on your life in a way that nothing else really, bar a very good devil's food cake, chocolate cake thing, can do for you, you know?
Very good. Thank you, Tanya. I see we have lots of questions coming in, and that's great. And please keep your questions coming in. Gordon, there was a question that was put to me earlier around, can you tell us about the damaging effects of sporting organisations adopting elite level standards from the Olympics? Hopefully that's something that you're able to give us some insight on.
Yeah, I can, and I think it's it speaks to the fact that, like, if there's no policy or no guidelines or no education, people with the best will in the world will look for some kind of guidelines to follow in terms of including people or allowing people to participate in sport. So what we've heard in our work quite often is that a trans person has gone to their local club and you know, they've said, I'm trans and I'd like to take part, and the club has gone, we'd like you to take part. That's great. Let's just check what guidelines we need to follow. And then they end up having a really intense conversation with that person about what surgical interventions they've had, what hormones they're taking, what their anatomy is or isn't, because they're looking at kind of Olympic level guidelines for professional sport. And almost all professional sports have guidelines around transgender athletes taking part in sport. And those guidelines are very much focused on the medical or surgical interventions that someone has had and the effects that those interventions have had on their bodies. But for someone who just wants to rock up to their local GAA club, they shouldn't have to have a conversation about, you know, oh, I'm taking testosterone and it's a gel or it's an like, it's just ridiculous. No non-trans person, no cisgender person would have to go through that kind of conversation. But I can understand why it happens, because if there's nothing else to go on, you go and you find what you can. And I think it's just that really speaks to why we need these kind of tools, these guidelines, as Jared says, a kind of a one-pager for people to go, this is how you have a conversation. These are some things you might ask. These are some things you might not ask. And it just makes it simple for everyone and takes away that pressure, because, you know, there's nothing going to be more off-putting than thinking I'm going to have to go in and talk about, you know, my surgery, my anatomy. It's, you know, it's not what anyone wants. No one wants to be having that conversation.
Yeah, and I think, again, just bringing the parallels back to the workplace, it's the same, you know, like we shouldn't have to, you know, disclose very personal things about ourselves. I suppose some of the work we talk about and we promote and taken from the university out into the world is this concept of universal design, you know, so we design our organizations or our clubs or whatever that happens to be for everybody, so that they don't have to disclose personal things about themselves. And I know that's the utopia. Hopefully we will get there someday, but that's really what the intention of today is about. Morgan, I have a question for you, just because I know certainly with our early discussions with Larry and the team in Leman, you seem to have like a handle, I suppose, on what's happening, particularly within Ireland around this. And there was a mention around only 15% of sporting clubs in Ireland have a fit for purpose grievance procedure, you know, and I suppose, you know, in some ways we're talking about the horses bolted, right, that people are having to now, you know, maybe report and get support around things that may have happened. Could you just talk to us a little bit more around that and why you feel that's you know, that things need to change in that area?
Good question. I suppose the for purpose grievance procedure it goes back to what Gordon said earlier about there's not much point in just having a procedure that sits on the shelf and it's not an active document, and that nobody in the organisation is educated on, or in the sport itself it's educated on. So what it's about really, what a good grievance procedure maybe it's about giving people a voice, making it an easy voice through a form or a policy, and then educating people on that policy. And that policy should link in with things like the code of conduct and those clauses on homophobic, transphobic and biphobic abuse that I spoke about earlier. And what it should be really is an easy way for somebody who has experienced some form of grievance to air that grievance in a way that isn't adversarial. We were involved just anecdotally a couple of years ago in a quite high profile grievance procedure that made it into the newspapers, and it involved various different levels of appeals before different council bodies, a lot of them populated by old men, and it was just a very, very uncomfortable situation for everybody involved, and that would kind of lend yourself to thinking, if I'm, do I want to be a part of that sport? Do I want to go through that if there isn't an easier way? So a good grievance procedure, again, it's something that might start off with an informal way of reporting a grievance to a coach or a manager. If that coach or manager isn't suitable, and then something we've tried to do in our policies is put in mediation. So mediation is where an independent kind of expert. So there's a group called SDSI. They run mediation that's specific to sport. So an independent person would see if they could, resolve the issue in an informal, conciliatory way, in whatever way the person who's experienced the grievance is comfortable with, be that in the same room as other people or individually through, written comments. And then maybe, solutions could be further trainings in inclusion and diversity. But again, just to go back, it's about giving people that voice and making it an easy voice, but also educating people about that and linking it into your other policies in the organisation.
Thank you, Morgan. And again, I suppose bringing it into my world of expertise, if I think about this from a workplace perspective, we always kind of promote, focusing on making sure that the people managers are equipped. Sorry, Larry, I'm getting some feedback just from your, so we would always advocate, making sure that the kind of people managers and the leaders within the organization are kind of a step ahead around supporting people, making sure that they feel confident around being able to have the conversation so they have access, again, back to that point around the language of this. I think that's certainly Tanya and I on that journey within DCU, it's really critically important that people really understand and managers feel comfortable being able to kind of navigate their way through conversations, and also I suppose being aware that they're not going to have all the answers, and that there's groups, there's organizations like yourselves, Morgan, that they can reach out to get support. Ger, just I suppose on that point, taking that to you and the fantastic work that the GAA have been doing, and certainly again outside looking in, you certainly seem to be one of the leading organisations in Ireland in this space. What impact do you think, or have you seen, or do you have any stories around the impact that's had on the individuals within Ireland and within the local sporting community?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. And just to maybe echo Morgan and what you said there, Sandra, one of the key actions I did when I came into the role was get yourself, Sandra, and the Centre of Diversity and Inclusion in DCU to come in to run a training session in Crowe Park to the managers and to other staff members. And that was a hugely positive. And actually they became, and sometimes you don't realize that, but they became my diversity and inclusion ambassadors in the organization. So that benefit to that training, educational awareness workshop opened the doors to many people who didn't understand maybe, or didn't have the terminology. And I think some of the times when you think of that in the GA context and in the sporting context, we have generations of men, women, and LGBT community whose terminology has changed in the last 20 years to 30. That's an area that I try to focus on in the GA and impact where you technology and think what is, what isn't, and also having officials, coaches, volunteers, parents, understanding if somebody comes to you. So the GA clubs do have safeguarding officers, and many of them have had those inquiries and those questions, and a lot of them have come back to myself. So I would say in the last year, because there is someone dedicated to diversity and inclusion in the GA and in the area of the LGBT, that we are progressing in this area. I have used that as Sandra as a sounding board, and many others as well, and the working group for LGFA, Camogie, Rounders and Handball, as well as the GA. And it's those resources that we pull on, and it's those resources that support me in my role as well. I've seen the impact, I suppose, in the last year with the National Inclusion Fitness Day that we ran just on the 23rd of September, where we were the flagship for the European Week of Sport. And that varied from Pride, GA matches, to senior players wearing coloured laces in their football boots, to virtual events, as well as areas, and maybe just that connection with different local groups that they didn't know within their area, in the area of LGBT and of disability. So when we talk about inclusion, it's about opening up maybe our eyes locally, and then also looking to other people for help and advice. And that's what I continue to do, and get great support from yourself, Sandra, and from DCU.
Very good, thanks, Ger. We have somebody, it's more of a comment really than a question, just talking about that they heard anything about LGBTI plus, unless it was a slur. And that's interesting. I was actually having a conversation with somebody this morning. We have the anti-bullying centre within DCU, and they're about to publish some research that shows that young people in schools, 1 in 3 young people in schools are being bullied or have been bullied. And like when you look deep down into the research into that, some of that is around, being called names like queer and gay and whatever else, and and some of it is related to kind of racism and racial slurs and things like that. So it's very profound. I just on that point, the conversation actually I was having this morning just around this concept of reclaiming the words, like queer, for example, has been reclaimed. But we did move to the point around how important it is to have the visible role models. Because if we had more people at the top of elite sport and the top of sports, visible role models saying, yeah, what's the problem? What's the problem? There's no problem here. It opens the door, I think, and creates space, I suppose, for young people to feel more comfortable being themselves and coming out. Gordon, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Or, when you hear that we don't hear about it unless it's a slur.
Yeah, I mean, I've so many thoughts. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. And I can't help but kind of go to my own experience when I was a young gay man in school. And when I was bullied in school, some of that bullying took place like in the changing rooms for sport, on the pitches. And I think when I look at like the great work, say, that Belong To has done around bullying and what that looks like for young LGBT people, my experience is echoed in what they see, and that a lot of the kind of the bullying of LGBT young people may happen in a sports context or around that kind of context. And I think that's why a lot of LGBT people as adults have a complex kind of relationship with sport, in that it kind of maybe triggers those memories and those feelings and that feeling of being excluded. And I'm so interested in what you said, Sandra, about that part of your brain that lights up when you're excluded, because, I just think that must be so damaging for young people. And I think all the research shows that and yours does too, that bullying is still such a huge issue, and it has such a detrimental impact on people and can kind of carry with them through their life. So it's such a shame that sport should be connected with that. And I was also thinking, there are so like you say, there are so few. I mean, I am not a sports expert, but there are so few out professional sports people. I mean, in Ireland, I can name 3 basically. We've got David Goff, we've got Donald Cusack. There's very few, and I just think that sends it just doesn't send a great message, does it? It's not really saying that, it's very welcoming, particularly to a cohort of people who maybe have had a really complicated and maybe awful relationship with sport. So it kind of needs, I feel like change needs to happen in a holistic way across all the levels. So we need to see people being able to get into their local clubs. They need to feel welcome. We need to get that message out. I mean, I agree. I think the GAA are doing a great job in showing that they're inclusive and that everyone is welcome. And I think other sporting bodies will follow along. And I think that's really positive. But we also need to see kind of role models, and we need to see people like David Goff going on the Late Late Show and just kind of, I hate the word normalizing, but normalizing kind of, the fact that you can play sport and be LGBT.
Yeah, and I think, allyship is really important, right? This concept of, it's not about the LGBT plus community having to fix the problem, right? It's not their responsibility to fix this. And I think that a great testament to the work that is being done through this campaign is this concept of allyship. Okay, and people not feeling like they're on their own, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with a straight person or a heterosexual person coming out and saying, what's the problem? I stand for this. And I think that that's important because that will help remove the stigma. So we're not expecting, again, people to disclose personal things about themselves in situations that they shouldn't have to disclose. And again, if I take it back into the work environment, right, we talk about the people managers being the custodians of the culture. And if we take that into this environment, that would mean then that the managers, whether they're voluntary or not, right the way from community sports, right the way up, the managers are the people that own the culture. And the managers are the people that can change the culture. And I think that that's really important, those two things, allyship and equipping the managers with the information that they need. Tanya, from your perspective, have you any thoughts or comments on that? You're on mute, Tanya.
Sorry. Yeah, I was trying not to have background noise. The neighbors are mad. No, I think you need the big picture things, but you also need the small picture things. And like some of the comments I've been reading there, that have come through about, it being said in a dressing room or it being said on the pitch, is that to empower managers and referees and coaches to just go, oi, stop that right now. Stop it if you saw boys picking on girls, or you'd stop it if you saw someone picking on a racially different kid, so just stop it. Just stop all that kind of nonsense straight away. And if you cut it off, so it has to happen at the big level, but all those little small microaggressions also need to stop. Because actually, I think it's microaggressions that are the worst. It's like they're the things that get you to the point where you end up going to make a formal complaint. And ideally, you create an environment where no one ever needs to use the complaints procedure that Morgan was talking about, because we get to the point where other people, by managers stopping it, other people in the group and other people in the team and in the sport also call it out and stop it, and that's only going to happen slowly over time, but it happens by people who are in leadership roles taking the lead and demonstrating what is and what is not acceptable within any particular organization.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, isn't it, Tanya? Because it's the normalizing, if I can use Gordon's term there, of these and allowing these microaggressions to take place. And obviously they have a profound impact on the person that is experiencing them, but allowing a manager to stand by and allow those things to happen, again, it creates that environment of exclusion for the individual, and has a detrimental impact on mental health. When we think about culture and how we describe culture, we describe it as the way we do things around here. And I think that this is back to this policy and practice. When I think about the work of diversity and inclusion, we describe it as policy and practice and hearts and minds. And I think it goes to some of the comments that have been made this morning, is you can have or this afternoon, you can have all the policies in the world, right? It really is around the practices and the day-to-day actions and behaviours that the community are taking. And one of the questions that's come through there is, and I suppose it's more of a curiosity from somebody, is saying there's tons of out gay female role models. why do we think it's possible for more, why is it not possible for more male athletes to join them? And why is there such a difference in 2020? I don't know, Ger or Morgan, would either of you like to take that?
Yeah, maybe just from the point of view, maybe even of the GAA, I find it very hard to find visible role models, male role models. But when you look at the LGFA, you have a number of role models who are very vocal and very visible. And I think it is that of the changing culture. It is that understanding of coming out, or the dressing room talks, or just as someone mentioned there, the comments about the slur. It is about having that confidence in your team, in the whole culture, in the whole environment, and having a safe environment around you, so you do feel comfortable in coming out in that. And I think that's where we're hoping to get. That's the mission. But I do find, as well as that you spoke there about people stamping out the words and the discrimination, and we did launch a Responding to Racism project in March of last year, and it does cover the whole area of discrimination, racism and homophobia. And the first couple of lines of that workshop that has been delivered, and you would have seen some of it in the New Gales documentary, is that it's everyone's responsibility. And you do have support from the officials, from national level, and from your committees and your members and your volunteers in the GAA. And I know David is on the call here as well. As an official, they do have those powers. And I think it is on ourselves when we are playing any GAA that Tanya said there. If you hear those words, or you hear, is you stand up and support the person if you feel comfortable enough. And it is to do with confidence. If you support that person who has been verbally attacked. And then it is about educating people to be that person to stamp it out, stand up, unite, and also report it. So I think all of that is starting to create a safe environment and a culture of helping people to use your words, to also use your own confidence and support the people that are being discriminated against.
Yeah, I know in the work of the Anti-Bullying Centre, they talk about this concept of upstander. So not being a bystander and being upstander. And a lot of the work they would do with young people in schools is very much around promoting that concept of upstander. You know, don't stand by and allow it to happen, you know, that because that's where you have the impact, you know, and it's, and again, if we can make that happen in our sports clubs, we make it happen in our schools, you know, obviously then it'll have a positive impact on society. So we've 2 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is we could stay here for the day. I think people will probably listen to us for the day as well. But you know, I suppose one thing I will say is that this is the start of a conversation, right? This isn't the end. We are all here to help organizations come together. I don't want any club or any individual to feel like that they're on their own, because they're not. And that's why we're here. We've a collective of people from all different aspects and different expertise, and we want to keep this important conversation going. So please stay connected. So what I'm going to do just before I close, I'll just run around my virtual room here and just ask people to say their last few points. Morgan, I might start with you.
Yeah, I was actually just going to come in on that, the last query. The male people coming out in sport is obviously, it's a slow process, but there's a lot of encouraging signs. I think my own sport is rugby, and I know like the reaction to Israel Folau's comments last year, where the whole rugby community really gathered around in support of gay rights. And recently in football in America, I think one of the professional teams, they all walked off the pitch in support of a player who had received homophobic abuse. I know they're only small, they're small wins, but back to the points that were made earlier about the leadership and role models, and that will make a big difference in the next while. But Really, that's my message, as I said at the start, is the importance of inclusivity in terms of the sports bodies being able to connect with communities, and to see it as a real positive as opposed to some sort of red tape.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Morgan. Ger, have you any last comments?
Yeah, just on Morgan's comment there as well. That's one of the things we found, is that there is more positivity in the area of diversity and inclusion, and as I say in the Gaelic saying, too small land the hubba, but we have a lot more work to do. And just to say, we do have a new LGBT GAA club starting in Leinster, which is very, very progressive in the area of the GAA. And also as well, that it's just to encourage club members at local level to come together and contribute new ideas of how we as a GAA community can show our support and be allies and stand up. And I think that comes back to your connection and your identity, but also your confidence in your club and in the members around.
Very good, thank you. And Gordon?
I suppose in terms of the trans community, that sometimes I think, you know, you hear things about like that it's a difficult issue, or it's a complex issue, or it's tricky to deal with, and I suppose I would just like to remind everyone that we're talking about human beings, and that human beings really just want to be treated with dignity and respect. So I would hate for anyone to think that just someone's identity is a barrier to them, you know, being able to support them or encourage them or help them to participate in sports. So I think, you know, it can get complicated and there are questions that need to be answered, but I think the fundamental thing of treating another human being with dignity and respect is the crucial thing that will kind of get you through any interaction you're having. So I would encourage everyone to just, you know, be nice to each other. And I've just won this world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. A very important point. Yeah, thank you. Tanya? Last word.
So if I could take the opportunity of having such a huge audience here to give a plug for a campaign I'm involved in. So I'm involved in a campaign called #IrelandTurnsPurple, which is taking place this Sunday. So this Sunday, November the 8th, is International Intersex Solidarity Day. So it's a day where we stand with our intersex community and we say, hey guys, we see you, we're with you, and you're all right. And in support of that, 52 buildings, places, like some of them are fountains, all around the country are lighting up in purple this Sunday evening in support of our intersex community. And so the campaign is run from a research project I'm working on, which is on Twitter. It's at Intersex Map. So if you want to follow along there, that would be great. If you happen to have access to an amazing stadium, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, or any other lovely building that could maybe go purple on Sunday and would like to join in, we would love to have you on board. And if you don't have access to a fancy building, maybe you might put a twibbon on your social media or just retweet us and join in and be supportive. That would be so amazing. Thanks very much. Sorry for taking your platform to plug something else.
No problem, Tanya, and it's all important work. So not at all. And actually, just on that point, our plan now in the new year is that we start to promote all the work we're doing. There's some fantastic work happening in all different aspects of DCU and research around supporting the LGBT plus community within Ireland. So you'll be hearing more about that just a little after Christmas. So I'm going to close it now because we're a little bit over time. I want to say thank you to the panelists. It's been fantastic having this discussion with you today. As I said, it's one of many. Hopefully you'll stay with us on this journey. I think we have important work to do in this space. And again, my call out to sporting organizations is you're not alone. Our managers you don't have to try and do this yourselves. You know, there isn't anything you're going to come across that hasn't been solved or addressed or thought about or documented somewhere else. So please do not feel like, that it's too complex to get started or you have to do it on your own, because you don't. I want to thank Emma Lou, she probably can't come on camera there now. She has single-handedly pulled this together and led this campaign. You will see her video on the website as well. She's done a fantastic job, I have to say, and it's great to have her on board in the centre. I see Creefif from AIB couldn't make it, as I've said. just to say again, we really appreciate their sponsorship, and we wouldn't be able to do it without them. So thank you, Caoimhe. And I'm going to close it for today. So stay in touch. If you didn't get a chance to submit a question, please do, and we'll respond to them. And enjoy the day. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.